I am a massive vinyl nerd. I mean, I even wrote the #1 best-selling book, Why Vinyl Matters. So I did not pass up the opportunity to nerd out with none other than Joel Death. Joel not only has one of the coolest last names ever, I mean, come on, Death, but has held many different jobs in the music business, from doing the A&R Mushroom Records, where he discovered the band The Darkness, to his current role as label manager at Music for Nations. Joel also has a wildly successful Instagram account called My Dad's LPs, where he reviews an album from his father's massive collection. I had the chance to sit down with Joel at Sony Music Corporation in central London a couple weeks ago and talk about all this and more. Hey guys, it is Dr. Jen with another episode, and I am at the Sony building. Is it the Sony building, Joel? Is that what we call it?
Yes.
The Sony building. With my guest.
I'm Joel Death.
And what do you do here at Sony, besides looking gorgeous and being the pinup for Music for Nations?
I am a label manager consultant for Music for Nations, which is the rock label within Sony Music.
Okay, excellent. Now, what exactly does that mean?
Well, Music for Nations are a rather small entity within the major Sony building. There's only two of us and an intern. So my role is actually more marketing and assisting Julie Weir, who I work with. And what we do together is that we find the acts, we sign the acts, and then we market them and we promote them and do all the things that a label does, but there's just two of us. And they are predominantly sort of more left field, more sort of heavier acts as opposed to, more the pop.
Like Ed Sheeran. It's not the Ed Sheeran kind of rock and roll.
No, it's more the metal and rock world. Although we like to call ourselves a heavy label because we feel that heavy has so many more positive connotations than just say rock or metal. You know, heavy can be
the Queens of the Stone Age could be,
or like Nine Inch Nails.
Yeah, Nine Inch
Nails. You wouldn't call them
Nails.
like a metal band, would you? But they're heavy.
No.
So we.
How weird is that? Like, I never think of that, but that is really important. Like that descriptor.
We think so.
Yeah, that is a big deal.
We've worked with bands that you wouldn't necessarily think are a rock band or a metal band, but we think they have a heaviness, and we think heaviness is more than just music. It also could be a lyrical or an image or something that just kind of brings weight to an act that is more in the left field rather than just straight down a normal straight band.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but first I just want to talk about music in general. You have this amazing Instagram account, and what is it called?
It's called My Dad's LPs.
My Dad's LPs.
Correct.
And what exactly is that?
Well, after much persuasion, my father gave me his incredible LP collection, which was in the garage, and I asked very nicely over a number of years, and then eventually he said, okay, you can have them, and I was elated, but then I had this sort of burden thinking that I was only going to listen to a fraction of this collection of 500 LPs, and
500 is a good number.
It's around 500. It's not an exact number, I must be honest.
You're plus or minus on either side.
I think maybe
on the plus.
Yeah.
Really? So in what's the word I'm looking for? Where it's like on that side. Okay, but we'll leave the word. But yes, more than 500.
So
he. Are these yours now though? Or are they still his, but they're given to you, or is it a loan, or like what's?
I think they're given to me.
Okay.
But I have labelled them, given them. I'm a stickler for labelling things and giving them coloured stickers. They've got a different sticker to my own personal collection, just in case my father and I fall out, which I hope is not going to happen. But if he ever wants them back, he can have them back. But we're not aiming towards that, obviously. So I was fearful that I was only going to listen to a fraction, and I was just going to go to the classics, and I made a promise, not necessarily to my dad, to myself, to listen to every one, and then that soon led to the idea of reviewing and writing about everyone, and that led to Instagram, where we both know there's a very healthy, large vinyl community, and it led to me writing reviews on Instagram, and it's led to me now involving guest reviewers and bringing more people in, and things I didn't necessarily account for have been the most wonderful things, and most notably has been a reason to speak to my dad about music a few times a week, which has just been amazing. It's also led to finding some absolute hidden gems, which I'd never heard of, or bands I thought I knew of, but by further exploration, it discovers that I prefer them more or not. As well as the classics, all the Beatles, all the Floyd, all the AC/DC. So
I feel like on the Instagram you don't really put that much of that up. Like most of the records you put up on the Instagram account are ones I've never heard of.
Yes, well that's because of
Purposeful,
500,
yeah.
there's maybe 50 you've heard of and 450 you haven't. But I wanted to give them all an equal footing and to write as much about Earthquake, the San Francisco power pop band that really no one's heard of, who self-released their LPs, to Zeppelin 3. So it was a way of just sort of bringing a bit of respect, and you know they're all on vinyl, they've all been pressed. Someone loved them enough to invest the money to press them, just so that 40 years later one's more renowned than the other doesn't mean it doesn't deserve any less respect when reviewing them. So I've tried to give everyone that sort of respect. There are a few absolute duds. Unfortunately, my dad does own a lot of Ted Nugent. I think the first album is an absolute banger, but the rest is shit. There's a lot of Gary Glitter, unfortunately. And I never knew the Moody Blues released so many albums. And also, my dad owns all the solo albums from the Moody Blues members as well.
Really? So he went, as they expanded, he followed their...
Indeed he did.
Okay.
And what's fantastic is that late 70s, early 80s, when things all started to get quite interesting in the music world, we had post-punk and alternative suddenly emerging. What's fantastic is that my dad's got, you know, the Pretenders' first album and Blondie and Joy Division's first pressing of Joy Division's debut. And when I speak to my dad about these records, he's like, rubbish.
Really? Yeah. Interesting. So he was like experimenting almost, maybe checking them out.
Yeah.
And these are like ones obviously that we now consider classics.
Yeah, but it was just at the end of his musical experience, really, because he was used to AC/DC and Zeppelin and Sabbath. So when it did come to that alternative field, it just I could almost imagine the disappointment, and especially Unknown Pleasures, because that cover's so enticing, and thinking, what's this all about? Is this going to be the new Black Sabbath? And then being bitterly disappointed.
Yeah.
But then in turn I just find them an absolute, you know, joy to listen to. So I asked my dad for, you know, a short review on each one as well, and it's interesting that where we agree on things and then where we don't agree on things.
And what's interesting, you and I have talked about this before, is how has the vinyl experience helped you to get to know your father in a different way?
I think music, more so than any other medium, it connects people to memories and past events more than any other medium. Sorry, I repeated myself, but there's nothing quite like listening to a song you've not listened to at a time and being whisked back to a certain moment. And I think whilst I was looking forward to listening to some things for the first time, this wasn't the first time for my dad listening to some of these records, and he was in some ways reconnecting with moments from his past by listening to these records again, because when I told him what vinyl I was reviewing, he'd go on YouTube and he'd have a quick listen. And some of the stories...
Really quick, right there is really interesting, because he's going on YouTube,
yes,
which is about as far removed from the vinyl experience as you can get, versus you're on the vinyl. I love that. Yeah, so yeah, exactly.
They're mine. YouTube or Spotify, and what's been incredible, but not what I thought would happen, because it didn't even occur to me, has been some of the more personal stories my dad have shared. I always reconnect with a certain story, and this was actually before I started this process. For a while I was unemployed, and I went to a job centre, and I was a little late. And if you're late at the job centre, you lose your benefits. And I tried to explain to the nice lady behind the counter that I was late and I apologise. Would there be a possibility to continue to sign on? She goes, I'm sure that'll be fine. And she goes, what's your name? And I said, Joel Diath. And I said, D-E''A. She goes, I went to school with a Diath. I know how to spell Diath. And I said, oh really? Who did you go to school with? And she goes, Wayne. And I said, that's my dad. And her face, I think, was pure shock that this sort of broad, big, hairy man was saying, "That's my dad," and thinking all of a sudden she felt quite rather old, unfortunately. And then she just looked at me and she goes, "What, in Leighton?" I said, "Yeah." And brothers Adrian and Martin. She goes, "Oh yeah." And then she just stopped, and then this memory come flooding back, and she goes, "I had a party around my house, and your dad turned up with a copy of Magical Mystery Tour, and we listened to nothing else for the rest of the day, turning the sides over and over and over and over." And there's a glimpse into my dad's teenage life I had never seen before. And those are the sort of stories I'm getting when I talk to my dad now about the vinyl. And that's something that I think sometimes as a son you don't get to see. So what a glorious, beautiful relationship building exercise. Even for, even though I'm in my late 30s, I think it's never too late to, reconnect. And through music as well is just a beautiful thing.
I mean, and the thing that's so great about that too is I think we tend to see our parents just in the way that they are as a parent, but not in any other way, like as a teenager or a young person or being excited about music and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And you're, like you said, you're seeing those other kind of versions of your father.
And even when your parents will try and convince you they had a life before you existed, I think it's often not until you hear it from someone else.
Yes.
And I was so blindsided by this woman's story. It really threw me, and it was a beautiful thing. And then I called up my dad, and he goes, "I'm sure it was Sergeant Pepper's."
She's
Don't ruin
wrong.
this moment, Dad. He said it was Magical Mystery Tour. So, but this, this whole process it's been a wonderful exercise in discovering new music, falling in love with vinyl again, and building a relationship with my dad.
So for you, what was your very first vinyl memory?
Well, it would be watching my dad play vinyl in the living room, playing air guitar to AC/DC. It's him listening to the Beatles. He would sit in the living room with a big pile of vinyl records, of which I wasn't allowed to touch, wasn't allowed to go near. I had grubby fingers as a child. And my dad was always so respectful of the vinyl, so respectful. And he would show me, but wasn't allowed to touch, of how to handle, how to put on the turntable, how to move the needle. And he'd have a needle that had a little weight at the back, and everything was so measured and respected. And it's undeniable that that level of respect is something that I held, not just for the physical product, but for music in general. It's there to be respected. And over the years, that respect has changed, and I respect the artists, and I respect the effort that's gone into making it. But I've always, then when I bought vinyl of my own and music of my own, it was about respecting all aspects of that. But I learned that from my dad, and my first experience of vinyl was, watching my dad, play LPs in the living room.
So how did you break into the music industry? One of the things that I find really interesting is that we didn't have classes when I was growing up of music industry classes or programs or degrees. So how did you even think I want to work in this, or what was your pathway in?
I grew up in a music obsessed household. I had not just my father but two older brothers who everyone had their own type of music they were fanatical about. So I grew up in a household just full of music, different music coming from each room in the house.
What was your thing growing up that you...
Oh, it was metal. And it was the more extreme side of things. I was fascinated by the real sort of niche, extreme metal side of things. I loved the stories, I loved the people, I loved the whole otherworldliness of it. So I was quite a young age a bit of a letter writer, and I'd exchange letters with what I like to call now church burning metal from Scandinavia.
Did you?
Yeah. And we'd trade tapes, and no one in the house.
So cool.
But I think from, my musical heritage was so well covered from my brothers and my dad, so it was the only music in the household that was also mine. But it led to a very, very passionate connection to music. And that I always cite as a reason of wanting just to get beyond just being a fan. And one of my brothers was in a band. They weren't in any way successful, but they had a manager. They were talking to labels about signing a deal, and there was a lot of what we call hype, I guess, these days. And he was always so generous in letting me hang around, going to rehearsals, going to gigs, and I began to realise that those boundaries that bands and promoters and labels often try and build, as in that's the artist, that's the fan, those things started to kind of come down. And all of a sudden I realised that, oh, that guy lurking at the back is the manager or the promoter. Well, I'm going to go speak to them. I'm going to go speak to the people at the merch stand. And I just tried to knock down those barriers. You know, I think the internet's done a good job of knocking down those barriers as well. More recently, you know, the bands are so much more open than they used to be. But, you know, remembering back to when we grew up, you heard that music on the radio. You maybe caught a short clip on terrestrial TV. We grew up with a lot less channels than you did, as in
America.
In America. So you caught these small glimpses, but going to these concerts with my brother, hanging out with other musicians. And there was also a moment when I started to go to gigs where within 6 months I was going to see bands who were a lot bigger 6 months down the line, or I was hanging out with musicians who then were going to be famous. And I noticed a change in, you know, just going to school, and I was saying, oh, last night I went and saw a band called Reef, and I hung out with a band called Skunk and Nancy. And they're like, who? And then within 9 months, they were both fans of Reef and they were both fans of Skunk and Nancy. And I'm like, I told you about those guys 9 months ago. And there was like this little A&R seed started to grow of wanting to know about things first.
Did you know it was called A&R there then? Because I just have a really clear memory, Joel. Like when I really identified, I'm like, I love music more than anything. But it's like you're saying, I didn't know what any of the jobs were. It just seemed like this weird, and nobody knew it. It isn't like when Julie was here earlier, all my friends want to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. And I'm like, I want to work in music. But I didn't know the different jobs.
I was a little obsessive with reading a label copy on the back of LP. So I knew, I had a fair idea. And I think just through hanging out with my brother, and I understand what a manager was, a promoter was, an agent was, an A&R and a label. So I had
basic knowledge from that.
I had a basic knowledge. And I knew the A&R people were the ones that went and discovered bands. Mm-hmm. And I was a gig obsessive. I'd always go to gigs.
And where did you grow up?
So East London.
East London, okay.
And there was a couple of metal clubs where they'd always put on bands, and I'd always go. And I remember very distinctly taking homework to do on the way home from the concerts, and I just immersed myself. I immersed myself into the magazines and the culture, and then I left school, and I got a very normal job in a factory locally.
Oh. What were you making?
I was just in the warehouse sending out till rolls to shops.
Okay.
And I was still going to the gigs. I was still interested. The internet was now becoming a thing, and I wanted to start a blog about music, and I wanted to do all these things. And then I started to write letters to record labels saying, "Can I come work for you?" Letters. Do you remember letters?
I remember sending that in the CV. To whom it may concern, the package, yeah. And I was following up on the phone.
Just sending my CV and a letter saying I'll work for free. My brother had just recently done university, and I said to my parents, if you'll support me the way you supported my brother, I want to live at home, but I want to get a job in the music industry. And I got a reply from a label, and I was there for just over a year, going in 1 day a week, but then going to see bands for them. And that was Music for Nations.
Was it?
90s, yeah. So my first ever job within the industry was at Music for Nations, and I've ended up there now.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's a nice
full circle.
Full circle. But and then from there, I got a job working with Corder Marshall of Infectious Records. He's now at BMG, runs BMG Frontline Division, and that's when I began to really hone in on my skills and go to as many gigs as possible. And I was always a firm believer that you don't know what's good until you listen to as much as possible. Because I'm always a firm believer that the real good quality will rise, and then you'll one day just be listening to something and you'll go, that's good. And you won't almost be able to tell why, but it's because you've immersed yourself in so much. I believe that style of A&R really is effective. Instead of, just listening to a couple of things, that one will do. No, you have to immerse yourself in the scene, immerse yourself. And I think that's more challenging now because we have so many streams of how to listen to music, and there's so many new bands or artists.
Bombarded. I mean, I have very clear memories of every day coming downstairs in the Interscope office and just in the reception area, literally every single day to the ceiling were packages of people sending in like their CDs, their tapes, their this, their that, every single day. And now I would assume that you have the digital version of that, like filling up your inbox.
Yeah.
So how do you immerse yourself in something now, like as a savvy? Well, let's back up for a second. So you're doing the 1 day a week at Music for Nations. You move over to work at a different place. What happens next? Like, are you now a full-time A&R man?
Yes.
Okay.
So
what did that day look like for you?
Going through all those demos, listening to all those CDs and tapes, assisting Corda, taking meetings for Corda Marshall, going to see bands for Corda, just being a general label assistant. This was still the time when you did physical press packs, so you used to photocopy, helping. Just a general office assistant. And I'm always happy to admit that I lucked out, and quite early on I discovered a band who I thought were incredible, and I persisted and played them continuously to Corda Marshall until the band were in a position where they were getting a lot of press and a lot of coverage on their own account. Then the heat started to build, and the band turned around and said, "You were there from the very start. We want to work with you." So that was The Darkness, where that was the first band I ever sort of championed and worked with, and that coincided with working with a band from South Wales as well called Funeral for a Friend, who a very similar sort of situation where I heard them quite early on. I championed them within the office, and I persisted, and the band got some natural momentum, and then we were in a position to offer them a deal. And this was all during the time when the label I was working for was being acquired by Warner Music, and they bought the Mushroom group of companies, which was part of Infectious was part of, and we merged with East West, and we changed the name to Atlantic Records. So then I was an A&R manager for Atlantic for 4 years, and I worked with Funeral for a Friend, I worked with The Darkness. I signed another act called Get Cape, Wear Cape, Fly.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that was yours.
That was me and Paul Samuels, who still is at Atlantic and still a good friend, as well as a few other bits and pieces. And what my day consisted of was, now I had a roster, was to make sure that those bands had all they need to make the record that they needed to make. So it was acquiring the right engineers, producers, mixers. Once the record was done, making sure that the mastering was taken care of, and then putting together and making this beautiful body of work, and then assisting marketing and making sure they've got all the tools they need to have a successful marketing campaign, and just making sure the band are happy. I've always seen the A&R world and labels as you're custodians of this art. You have these young, vibrant, excited musicians who are just brimming with excitement and activity and life, and you have to kind of take what they produce and sometimes just help mould it a little into something which is perhaps a little more palatable. Now, especially in the case of Funeral for a Friend, who were a heavy band with a lot of harsh vocals, and tell them that if you perhaps just compromise a little bit on this vocal here and replace it with a clean vocal, it would mean a longer career and a bigger career. And but you're somewhat a conduit of just taking this raw talent and helping it get to a wider audience. And you can never underplay that responsibility. And that's still something I take very, very seriously now when I work with my artists. Some of the artists have been through it for a few years or a few albums. They get to understand, but especially the new ones, I think we often misplace this sort of arrogance that young artists have, and I don't ever see arrogance. I see them being terrified. I see them not quite knowing how to react. And I've seen it happen, unfortunately. I've seen too many people say too many incorrect things to young artists, and they build this ego. And I still see a terrified young person not quite knowing how to deal with this level of compliments and level of fame. and it's a challenge to manage. And I always try and get to real roots of why they're a musician and why they want to be an artist. I'm a firm believer in also, especially in the alternative scene, these weren't the cool kids. These weren't the kids with lots of friends at school. These are the ones that were going home and writing in their bedroom and didn't have girlfriends. And sometimes within 18 months, they're the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And that is
messes with their head massively.
I think it's a challenge which the music industry is only waking up to now, where we have suffered one too many tragedies, and I think I agree, and it is something which can really be a challenge. And so I've always taken that responsibility, and you don't always get it right because we're always just human, but I've always tried to very seriously make sure that I work with the artist on delivering a piece of work that they're happy with and is as close to their pure art as possible, but just trying to sometimes occasionally mould it to a wider audience. When you work for a major label, I think it's very challenging, if not impossible, to deliver something as sometimes the artist would exactly like it. But that being said, we've just done that recently with an artist. They delivered an album and it was perfect, but it was their 5th album, so I think that was more experience kind of coming through. But
I mean, I just was saying to someone yesterday, I said, you can either be 100% the way that you think your brand and image and project and vision should be, or if you change it just a little bit, you can get up to that much more of an audience, and then from there you can talk about or express like whatever that is that
I am always a firm believer in using the tools around you to further your career. And there are few bands out there that are able to turn down any press offer, turn down any TV opportunity. And I always say to bands, I want to get you to there because, and I think a great example is Radiohead. And I think getting you to that position is the goal, because when you can just turn down opportunities because you're already successful enough, I think that's a very desirable place to be as an artist. But until that point, you might need to play the game a little bit. You might have to do the thing you don't want to do. Do you know, grit your teeth. It's work at the end of the day as well. It is work. There's you creating this art, and then you having to get out there and plug it and do the work. And it is a slog. Sometimes you're going to have to do things you probably feel uncomfortable doing, but that's everyone.
Yeah, in any career.
In any career. So, art and commerce. But I always say to the artists, I want to get you to a position where you can say no. And then we've done our job. And there, those artists do exist. I'm sure Trent Reznor's not chasing that press piece, But it's about working with them, and sometimes there's a conversation with the band, and sometimes that's a little bit of persuading and helping them to see a bigger picture. And that's fine. I'm very comfortable with those conversations. I very believe that my motives are still to get the art out as pure as possible, but with those slight changes.
So what would you say if a band is looking to get signed? What are some top 3 things that they should have? Like when you're looking at groups to potentially bring in to the label, what are 3 things that you look at and look for?
I know this might sound corny or cliche, but don't look to get signed.
What I find interesting is so many young bands, that's what they're...
I know. Being in a band is about have fun. It's not to find a label. And you're exactly right. I see lots of bands whose goal is to find a label. I think it should be much more focused on finding a fan base and enjoying yourself. And we live in a way now where to find a fan base, there's the tools that weren't available to a lot of bands just 10 years ago. So use them. But the label and the industry side of things, if something is there, it should come. Now, I find it disappointing that most bands want to get signed, and I think most bands should be doing it for the love of it. But obviously, it's an industry where a lot of people have seen a lot of people from who aren't cool make a very successful career and they have ambition. But I think you should take a note of why those people you hold up on a pedestal, why they got into it. And I can almost guarantee you it wasn't to be signed, it was to make great art. So always keep that in mind. If the raw talent is there and the ambition is there, then someone will find you and someone will help you make that into a job. And then you can worry about it being a job. Then you can worry about those things. But until that point, bands have just got to enjoy being in an unsigned band and enjoying the. It's one of those things. In hindsight, I think a lot of bands who were successful, even in a small way, will look back and go, "God, it was more fun when it was just us in the band, wasn't it?" You got to hold that close, because those early developing times are the ones where you're not worried about chasing the radio playlist and just wanting to hang out with your friends. Those are precious, and those are where the great songs will come from. When you're sitting in your mansion, songs are come less, and it's those experiences. But the unsigned band world is there's a lot of money in that, and there's a lot of people in there who will make a lot of money from people who are unsigned and get a lot of hopes up, and there's a lot of equipment that has to be sold, and a lot of people who are making money from all manner of things, and Battle of the Bands and all this sort of thing, and Empty Promises and all that sort of thing. And perhaps I'm a bit old school, and perhaps I'm a little bit traditional, but I think a band should not worry about being signed, and what they should do is just focus on this. If bands focused more on their songwriting than they did on trying to be signed, I think we'd be in a better state than we are right now. And I get a little disheartened when I see a lot of artists going, yeah, but look at our Instagram followers. I go, show me a chorus. I want to hear a chorus. I want to hear something that's going to make me think that someone's going to get a tattoo of your name on their bum. That is going to be more important for me. And I think only time will tell, but I think we are going through a challenging time for alternative acts at the moment. And I think time will tell whether this has been a fruitful or not fruitful time for alternative acts. And I think, unfortunately, it'll be the latter. And I think that's because of a number of reasons. But I think one of them is people are worried about numbers. People are worried about what they see. And I want to be still worried about what I hear. But we live in a time where people are listening with their eyes. The first thing they see is usually a photo or a logo and a number count under a YouTube video or a SoundCloud play. Or they're looking on the right-hand side of the Spotify, or they're seeing what the top tracks are. All these things you communicate with your eyes and not with your ears. So all those things are already giving you a preconception of what you're about to hear. And usually, back in the old days, you heard something on the radio, or a friend gave you a cassette.
That's true. Mixtape.
A mixtape.
You mixtape.
So you heard with your ears before anything else. But it's a very different psychology now.
But what's interesting about that too is if you're listening first without seeing anything, you're connecting with that music, I would say, in a much more unprejudiced sort of way. And if we look at dedicated fan bases, like one of the things I always say to people is I seriously doubt there's going to be a band that comes out now, in this climate we're in now, that's going to have the same rabid followers of bands that have been around for 15, 20 years, because of just the way that, like you're saying, the way that the visual is really the first part of it.
I think there's a number of reasons because of that, of which that is one. I think another one is that when we were growing up, you had limited funds. You weren't going to take a risk on something you didn't know, so you kept to your tribe, as I say. So you bought a goth CD because you're into goth music. You bought a metal LP because you're into metal. And now, where it's within two little strokes of your thumb, you can be going from one genre to another, one decade to another, one artist to another, and then all of a sudden you're in a whole different world. I think that's killing the tribe. They do exist, but I get fascinated when I see young goths these days.
Oh yeah, I love that.
I'm fascinated, and I almost want to go out and talk to them. Where are you from? How did you get into this? But I think, that wouldn't go down so well. So I'm not doing that.
Creepy. My husband and I, this is like 9 years ago, my husband and I first started dating. We were in Brockley in, is that South London? Brockley? Yes. South London. And we were walking our dog through a graveyard, and there was two goths in the graveyard. And I was so happy. I was like, oh, there's goths, they're in a graveyard, so excited. And my husband's just like, you're so weird. And he still married me. But that was like, you never see that kind of thing anymore.
It's very, very rare. And I saw one the other day walking down Walthamstow Market. I saw her with her mum, and she must have been, just a teenager. And I was like, how would you
I love you.
So much effort.
Yeah.
And
we appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's So I think that lack of tribe, because of the ability to listen to multiple genres so easily, and I think people are a lot more prone to say, "Oh, I'm a fan of everything."
Yeah, I hate that.
If you're a fan of everything, you're a fan of nothing.
Exactly.
So I think that's another challenging thing. But there's still some custodians, there's still some people out there who are holding the flame and doing it.
So, question. You and I are talking about this off camera, and that is, we're talking about me getting a book deal, and I'm like, oh my God, now I have to actually write the book. Do you find that and I'm like kind of pissing myself about it. Do you find that with bands? Like the whole goal is to get signed, and now they're signed.
That's when the real work begins.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been a firm believer in that. If you've got the natural talent and the raw talent, and you've managed to navigate yourself into a position where you've got a record deal, well, now the work begins. I think a lot of bands, to begin with, but I can understand it because you have goals, and then once you've achieved a goal, you have to readjust your goal. Some bands never readjust those goals, and they're just relieved they got signed, and then they don't take the opportunity to go, right, I've worked very hard to this point, now I have to set new goals, and they'll just get signed and they'll just wing it. Can't do that. Once you got signed, you have to then set new ambitions because you've achieved what you wanted to get. Set new ones. What do you want to achieve next? And I think it's the job of the label to sit down with the band saying, congratulations, chink of the champagne glasses, well done. Now, what do you want to achieve? This is how we're going to do it. And that should be a very, very focused meeting. Very, very focused on the next level of achievement. And yes, I think perhaps a few bands do really think that, signing is the goal, and it's not. It's to have a career. That's always what I want to give my bands, to give them a career where there's an opportunity for them to make a living, and hopefully write some songs that will mean that they will have a steady income for years to come.
So flip it really quickly, and then we'll wrap it up, and that is, if someone is watching this and they're like, I would love to get into A&R, how does someone get into that now?
Well, I got into it, I think, from a passion of music and working hard and going to gigs and writing letters and making a bit of a nuisance of myself. I don't like this notion that A&R is kind of a middle class job, and having met a lot of A&R people, I can see why it stands. I knew the presidents, nephew of the president of the label and all this sort of thing. I got it because I worked my arse off. If you want to get into it now, I think don't write letters, but become invaluable within your local scene of music. Involve yourself in any way you can. Help at bands. I will never criticise new managers because everyone had to start somewhere. And usually managers are making the phone calls that the band don't want to make, making arrangements, suggesting things that they may not have thought of. That's what management is. Start there. Take on a local band that you think, I want to help them out. Hit the phones, hit the emails. Become part of your local scene. Write a blog is another great example. When you are being seen as someone that labels and publishers need to work with because you have your ear to the ground, then you can think about a job in A&R. Now, the role has changed significantly recently because of the internet. It's undoubtable. And I'm perhaps catching up myself. So my advice is only limited to what I know, but I think the passion is universal. And being known as the person who, I need a good band, speak to him. I need to book a band, he'll know. And that can be any town or any city in the UK. Yeah, and yes, some cities have more of a music scene, but then there's more people. But if you create a little scene in your little local town, and all of a sudden people are hearing about the acts from that town, and every time people have a conversation about that band, you're in the mix, then you're going to get a reputation. Use the tools that are available. Don't just write a blog, write a good blog. Write the best blog. Be passionate about your writing. Be passionate about your photos. Just because these tools are now available doesn't mean you can just put sync up, because there are thousands of people just putting sync up. But be passionate. And you know what? If you don't think that passion is there, then it isn't A&R. It's for you. But do your research, read. You know, there's some great books out there. There were some great labels, and yes, their relevance aren't as important as it was back then, but read in the history of violin records. Because it gives you an idea of the passion that is required. It gives you an idea of the dedication. There's that film Supermensch on Netflix, the manager of Alice Cooper. Again, different scenarios these days, but the passion is there. Always a firm believer, no matter the format, no matter the tool, no matter the obstacle, no matter the magazines, the blogs, the radio, the online radios. If there is talent, it will work. And if you want to work with that talent, find it, associate yourself with it, and be indispensable. Be a part of that artist's journey or artist's journey. And then when you can go talk to a label and you say, oh yes, I was the person who runs this blog, and we talked about this band first, and I spoke to so-and-so about this band, and they're now doing this, and blah, 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 then you're like, well, he obviously knows what he's talking about. And that was pretty much what I did in the first place, but just use the tools that are available now.
2 more questions. 3 bands that you're excited about right now.
Zealand from Switzerland. I think, growing up as a metalhead, I've always been fascinated by the extremist side of metal, and here is an artist who is mixing blues and has a blues voice with the extreme thrashing black and death metal of the Scandics. That's exciting. I'm fascinated by that journey. Church of the Cosmic Skull from Nottingham. I absolutely love them. It's the Mamas and the Papas meets Deep Purple. I'm seeing them this Friday. I'm very excited about them. And as for a third band...
Who was the band you were managing? I loved them.
I unfortunately stopped managing them.
I know, I remember you saying that, but they were fab.
They were great, but they are now splitting up because Jessica, the singer's, going solo.
Okay.
As for a third act... Do you know what? I heard something Yes, I love Maggie Rogers. I think she's great, and I was listening to Maggie long before she signed, and I was a big fan of hers. And I heard an artist yesterday, and it reminded me of Maggie Rogers, and it's an artist called Christian Alexander. Christian Alexander. And he's got a track out at the moment called Going Through, THRU. Now, I only heard this yesterday, but I listened to it about 5-6 times in quick succession, and it's almost a bit like Mount Erie. It's very sparse, it's very open, and very simple instrumentation, and this sort of monotone, simple vocal, but it's fascinating. And it made me think of Maggie Rogers. Maggie Rogers is a lot more established and a lot more sort of musical, but it just made me think there's something about this which I can't quite put my finger on. And let's be honest, that is what we want to find. Mm-hmm. That thing we can't quite put a finger on.
Hard to describe, yeah.
So so I'm going to say Zealand, Church of the Cosmic Skull, and Christian Alexander, Going Through, THRU. I'll check them out. And I'm excited by seeing their journeys and seeing what becomes of them, and that's the beautiful thing, because as we all know, with music, it could go anywhere.
Where can people find you if they want to look at the whole LP journey that we were talking about on Instagram?
So my Instagram handle is my_dad's_LPs_ between each word, my_dad_LPs. My dad's LPs, sorry. I'm on Twitter at Joel Death with no apostrophe, so that's JOELDEATH. It's real. It's from Flanders, which was now Belgium. It's not a made-up name. Just because I work with heavy metal bands, I've not called myself Death.
It is the coolest last name, though.
Thank you.
It is so cool. I love it. All right, well, thank you so much.
Coming from Otter Bickerdike, it means a lot.
An Otter, I went to Olympic trials for swimming. So it was great, because they'd be like, swimming for the United States in lane 4, Jennifer Otter. Everybody thought it was a stage name, but no, it was real.
Oh, and is your husband Bickerdike?
He's Bickerdike, yeah. He's Bickerdike. I must really love him. Thank you so much, Joel, for coming in today. Super. Actually, you had us in today. Thanks for having us in today. Super appreciate it.
My pleasure.
That was Inside the Music Industry. And if you liked it, and come on, really, why wouldn't you? make sure you click subscribe for more episodes, information, and upcoming tidbits from what we have in store.